Chapter 9. She awoke to the smells of coffee, bacon, and eggs. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, but the aroma of breakfast didn't seem unusual to her. Rolling out of bed and grabbing her bathrobe, she went downstairs to see her husband standing over the stove. "Afternoon," he said, not looking at her. She kissed him on the cheek and seated herself at the table. He already had the places set for both of them, and the daily paper laid out in between them. She glanced over the front pages as he handed her a cup of coffee. Moments later, he was loading up their plates. They ate silently. Aside from a few initial compliments made about the food, they sat across from each other, reading the paper and munching away. He finished first and excused himself to get dressed upstairs. Immersed in a story about the split heroic attempts of the local volunteer fire department, she nodded as he walked to the bedroom. When she finished reading about the 3 of the 5 who didn't make it out alive, she picked herself up, placed her plates in the sink, and climbed the stairs to dress. She reached the bedroom as he was pulling his sweater over his head. The bed was made and the shades were drawn. She was at the dresser when he quietly slipped out of the room. Dressed in jeans and a blue denim shirt, she descended into the kitchen to see him washing dishes and pans. She sat at the table, looking at him, trying to decide what to say to break the silence. "Sleep well?" she asked. "Like the dead," he answered, not missing a stroke with the sponge. She smiled. "Must have had some dream last night." No response. "You sat up and were talking in your sleep." He put the cleaned pan on the drying rack and turned to her as he toweled off his hands. "It wasn't a dream." They were silent for an odd moment. He sat across from her. "Something violent in my dreams last night woke me up and followed me into reality." "Was it him?" Her voice sounded almost sarcastic to herself. He was quiet for a second, thinking silently. She bit her lip, thinking that she had upset him. "I think it was something sent by him." "Then who was it?" "It wasn't a who. It was. It had a face and a body and a voice. God, did it ever have a voice. But it was a what? It was the evil." "The evil?" she asked. "Well, it makes sense. If you're working for God, you'd have nightmares about the devil." He was looking through her. "Maybe it was his minion that disturbed your dream." She heard the last line and didn't believe that she had said it. It sounded so corny and biblical to her ears. "In a sense, you're right," he said. "In the good and evil, God and devil sense, that is." They were quiet again, he contemplating, she trying to read into his mind via facial expressions. "You said that he was calling to you." He looked up. "Long distance or local?" she asked. "Long distance. Collect." He looked down at the table and his smile faded. He looked up. "We have to go to him." "Why?" "Because he's calling me to come." "Who is?" "I don't know, but I know he's on the East Coast somewhere." "Somewhere?" "We are not going to head out for the East Coast to look for someone who probably doesn't exist." "He does exist." "Why do you think fate has gotten us to this point? Why do you think I healed like this?" Maybe Laska was right about it being genetic. Of course he was right, he said. This startled her. For the first time, it seemed he wasn't attributing his recovery to holy powers. But so was Gabrielle, when she said about God working within his own laws, he added. She told you she said that to me? No, it's. Then you overheard? No, but what she said should have convinced you. This is a little too far-fetched. If God helped you heal, then we should just be thankful for our luck and go on with our lives. He was quiet, staring into her eyes. You are convinced, he said matter-of-factly. She turned her head and looked away. He continued, You are. You're convinced that this is real, but you just have to take the opposing view. So I can keep us, he raised his voice over hers and continued, just because there can be one. We have to complement each other like that so we can take on whatever is waiting for us on the East Coast. I have an opposing view so that we can live a normal life. I don't want to go cross country on a wild goose chase for the devil. Then you don't have to come all the way with me. What's that town where your sister lives in New York? Oneonta. You can go and visit her, and I'll go looking. When I find him, I'll get in touch with you. It was the fact that he said when instead of if that made her think. He was really taking this seriously, as though it was an inevitability. This wasn't possible. Even if it was, there was only a chance, and a chance merits an if. Maybe you should go, and I'll stay here, she said. But what happens when I find him? If you're not there, I won't. What do you mean, when? She made her voice loud enough so he couldn't overpower it with his own. You have to admit that he might not even be there waiting for you. He is there waiting for both of us. She looked through him. In a daze, she lifted herself from the chair and walked to the hall closet. Putting on her coat, she turned around to face her stubborn husband. The words came out of her mouth without her realizing it, as if something was making her speak through the pain her own words caused. I think we need some time apart. You go. I'll be here when you get back. Where are you going? His voice gave away his desperation. For a walk. I gotta be alone and away from you. Jean, his voice was loud. You don't have to do this. You can believe me. She wanted to. She really wanted to tell him she did. She watched as the sadness crept across his face, as if the plug had been pulled and his soul was draining away. I'm sorry. She stood with the door open, witnessing the change of expression. His jaw clenched together, his brow wrinkled up, and a fire burned from his eyes. The face of anger like she had never seen it. He grabbed a book from the coffee table and threw it at her. She ducked out of the door, closing it behind her, and ran down the walk. She heard the book hit the door, followed by other consecutive thumps. From the street, she looked back at the house and heard him yell at the top of his lungs, a deep, raspy scream that could be heard, she thought, for miles. She quickened her pace as she walked, all the while thinking that this was not the man she had married.